This joint subcommittee hearing with the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, and Nonproliferation, and the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous materials, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email either subcommittee clerk. As a reminder to members, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you're not recognized by the chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with HRES 965 and the accompanying regulations, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. See, we have a quorum, and will now recognize myself for opening remarks. I will then be followed by the acting ranking member, Mr. Perry, Chairman Langevin, and then ranking member Stefanik. I will then recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans and Foreign Affairs and Armed Services members. Before we get started and before I do my opening statement, I think it would be remiss for us not to, mention the President and the First Lady and, know that they're in our thoughts and prayers and, hope for a speedy recovery. And also the tens of thousands of Americans that test positive every day for this virus, they're in our thoughts, and, it does underscore that this is a virus. This is a biothreat. It doesn't know if we're Democrat or Republican, doesn't know what God we worship, what our country of origin is. It's a virus. And it does underscore, the importance of this topic that we're talking about today, but it does, underscore that this is, naturally occurring events, but what bad actors may see as they see a threat like this that really has brought the entire world to its knees and certainly has wreaked economic havoc, both here domestically but internationally. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and both having the Department of Defense and the State Department, again, underscores the importance of this. And my focus as subcommittee chairman, under the guise of nonproliferation, we spend a lot of time talking about nuclear threats, but what we're seeing right now is the real vulnerability to biologic threats. And just to put that into context, we've not had an aircraft carrier brought to its knee by a kinetic force, a missile, or anything like that. But we just saw in this past year an aircraft carrier brought to port because of a virus, and that really does underscore what I worry about. And when I think about this, I think about it, in a couple of different ways. It's very difficult to obtain nuclear capabilities and nuclear technology. Yet we dedicate hundreds of personnel and international organizations like the IAEA and others to reduce that nuclear threat. That's totally appropriate. We want to make sure nuclear technology and weaponry doesn't end up in the hands of bad actors. But if I put my doctor scientist hat on, the availability of technologies to alter viruses and do genetic editing, the know-how and the capabilities are rapidly increasing, and that is something that keeps me awake at night. And again, we know there are bad actors out there. Certainly post 9/11, many of us prepared for, we saw anthrax, we saw other threats, we worried about smallpox and so forth. And that is something that I think in a bipartisan way, Congress working with the administration should really think about, what are the things that we have to do to move ahead. I look forward to the witness testimony, and there's several areas that I think about, and I'm going to be curious about from the witnesses. As we defeat COVID-19 and spend the billions of dollars and build the infrastructure to defeat this virus, I also think we should strategically be thinking about how we use those resources to also prepare for biosurveillance, to be ready for the next, whether it's a naturally occurring virus or biologic threat, but also think about how we have those dual-use capabilities as we build that infrastructure to do biosurveillance for man-made threats. I also, as we move forward, we don't we've got the biological, the BWC, but I think we need stronger multilateral organizations with like-minded allies that we can work with. And again, I'd be curious how DoD and state are thinking about creating those multilateral institutions. And then lastly, when I think about the ethics of gene editing and where that's going in the technology, we really haven't created the standards and norms that say, this is appropriate for advancing of science, but this really is a little bit dangerous, and you probably ought not to be playing around with genes in this particular way, and creating those standards and norms and what that would look like. And again, I think that's an appropriate place where the scientific community, Congress, again, working with the administration, ought to put those standards in place, not just for the United States, but for the international community. So, again, our thoughts and prayers are with the President and First Lady and those thousands of Americans. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't just put my doctor hat on for a second. And as we enter the fall and winter, let's do what we can to keep everyone safe. Let's wear face coverings. Let's continue to practice physical distancing. Let's continue to wash our hands and practice good hygiene. Let's avoid large indoor gatherings that we have seen really do act as super spreading events. And the most important thing that we can do right now as we enter the fall is everyone go out there and get your flu shot. Please get your flu shot. So with that, let me recognize the ranking member, Mr. Perry, for 5 minutes of opening statements.
Thank you, Chairman Barra. And thank you to our distinguished panel for offering your counsel today. The coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the potential for increased biosecurity threats and what can happen when irresponsible actors disregard international agreements for the sake of self-prevention. A strong international biosecurity regime only works when its constituent members agree to make it work. We need to assess the shortcomings of U.S. multilateral engagements and determine where improvements need to be made. The 2005 International Health Regulations went into force in 2007 and called on all nations to be compliant by 2012. However, by 2012, only about 20% of all countries were compliant, and even today, most countries have still not complied with the 2005 regulations. This administration has taken a significant amount of criticism for questioning U.S. engagement in institutions like the World Health Organization. Let me be clear about this. The World Health Organization's complicity in spreading the coronavirus should not be rewarded with the United States' indifference to its failures. The WHO's strong affiliation with the global health security agenda also raises significant questions about GHSA's long-term efficacy. There is an obvious issue of a lack of enforcement in the international community. Different levels of investment in biosecurity lends itself to a permanent condition of moral hazard, where select communities like the United States are compensating for the lack of investment from other states. Despite our best efforts to stymie the spread of biothreat, there's only so much we can do alone. Key programs like the State Department's Biosecurity Engagement Program cannot use funds in countries like China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, or Syria, despite the fact that several of these countries have experimented with biological weapons and are likely candidates for future offenses. Countries like North Korea have a clearly offensive biological weapons program with no end in sight. How do we confront the fact that we have an unreliable international biological weapons control regime? More importantly, in measuring success against the spread of biothreats, what exactly does success look like when China dominates several key institutions? As it stands, China has provided a gift to non-state actors that wish us harm. They have shown us and the world the impact that a potential bioweapon can have on the American economy as well as our society. Threats to our way of life have multiplied exponentially as a result of the coronavirus, and this timely hearing will be confronting that uncomfortable truth. I am also grateful to have our witnesses before us today as they speak more about synthetic biology and gene manipulation. We need to find out more about the national security implications that synthetic biology can pose to the United States, especially in light of the fact that several countries are working with extremely hazardous pathogens in subpar laboratory settings. Well, that being said, I do also offer my prayers and best wishes to the First family, to Hope Hicks, and to anybody that's been affected by the virus, whether they've contracted it or whether it has occurred in their family members, loved ones, or community. We're all dealing with it one way or the other. I certainly thank the chairman for the time, and I yield the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Let me now recognize the chairman of the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee, Chairman Langevin.
Thank you, Chairman Barra. And I want to begin by also acknowledging and saying that the President and the First Lady and the First family are in my thoughts and prayers. I know they're all in our thoughts and prayers right now, and the people around the President's administration who may also be experiencing effects of the virus. We pray that they all have a quick and a full recovery. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank my colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, and Nonproliferation, and particularly you, Chairman Barra, and Ranking Member Yoho, and I know Mr. Perry is standing in for the Ranking Member right now. I want to thank you all for hosting this timely joint hearing on biosecurity. I recognize Ranking Member Stefanik, as well as my colleagues on the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Emerging Threats, and Capabilities. This is a topic which, as we have seen of late, is vital to our nation's security, and I'm very pleased that we're holding this very important joint hearing. Emerging biological techniques such as gene sequencing, gene editing, and synthetic biology are rapidly changing the scope and scale of biological threats and could lead to an increase in biological weapons. Adding to the challenge, biological threats are easier to create than other weapons of mass destruction. Used in concert, cyber weapons and biological weapons enable a rogue actor to inflict major damage on a military power. Just last month, the Republic of Georgia's Health Ministry suffered a cyber attack from abroad on the database that stores medical documents and national COVID-19 pandemic management information. But we know Russian hackers have targeted organizations involved in COVID-19 research and vaccine development, including those in the US, the UK, and Canada. So these attacks and the current global pandemic underscore the import of collective scientific research, preparedness, and security across the interagency and with our allies, and for national and economic security. In a time when the United States is struggling to respond to the spread of a novel, highly infectious pathogen, we must ensure the interagency is working together to respond to the current pandemic and advance the collective effort to strengthen biological security across the range of threats. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, through its execution of the Department of Defense's Cooperative Threat Reduction, Biological Threat Reduction Program, and its Technical Reachback Analysis Cell, has been receiving foreign partner requests for preparedness and detection, including providing biosafety, biosecurity, and biosurveillance support in aid to aid the detection, diagnosis, reporting, and modeling related to the COVID-19 outbreak. There have been many good examples of the Btrp trained local professionals in countries like Guinea, Liberia, Cape Verde, Jordan, and Thailand. They diagnosed and confirmed the first cases of COVID-19 in their countries. Yet, in the face of known and emerging biological threats and the impact they could have on our national security and economy, and as a pandemic that could arguably present the single biggest threat to our country was starting to spread across the globe, the president's budget request was delivered to the Hill in February with a 36% cut to the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program's funding from last year's enacted level, at a time when the United States is struggling to respond to the spread of a highly infectious new virus we are alarmed by the department's significant reduction in the budget request for a mission of detecting and confronting biological threats to the United States. Thankfully, the House has acted, and our fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, H.R. 6395, added back $135 million to the CTR program. $89 million of that was additional funding for the Cooperative Biological Engagement Program. Additionally, the Department of Defense's Chemical and Biological Defense Program was primed to be a key partner in the fight against COVID-19. Its medical program funds and manages efforts to develop medical countermeasures, vaccines, therapeutics, and pretreatments. Its physical program funds and manages efforts to develop surveillance and detection technologies, diagnostics, personal protective equipment, and decontamination systems. To prepare against potential unknown threats, CBDP built expertise and capabilities to address novel pathogens, making it an ideal program to deal with the emergence of novel coronavirus. We are interested in hearing today whether the program was quickly and efficiently directed to participate in the national response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are obviously challenging times, and we need to double down on these programs, and we need to make sure that we are in fact prepared for the next biological or chemical event that could affect the country, and make sure that we have all the tools and resources in place to respond effectively, keep our country and indeed perhaps the world safe. We look forward to hearing more about the many efforts of both departments today, what we can do to help ensure your organizations have the authorities and resources needed to prepare for the emerging threats of both today and tomorrow, and how we can ensure that your departments are ready and able to act swiftly and decisively in the next crisis. So I join the host in thanking all of you, especially our witnesses, for joining us today. And I now yield back to Chairman Barra.
Thank you, Chairman Langevin. Let me now recognize the ranking member of the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee, Ranking Member Stefanik.
Thank you, Chairman Barra. I also want to echo my colleagues and send on behalf of New York's 21st Congressional District our thoughts and our prayers with the First Family, the White House staff, and all the American people who have been impacted by the COVID virus. I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Chairman Barra, and Ranking Member Yoho, as well as Chairman Langevin and my colleague, Mr. Perry, for hosting this hearing. And thank you for the members of the two subcommittees. Thanks to the witnesses from the Department of Defense and State for being here today. The issue of biosecurity is one of national importance. As I've stated previously, while the Department of Defense faces urgent challenges daily, we can never afford to lose sight of the critically important mission of countering weapons of mass destruction, and in particular, biological threats. The unpredictable nature of these threats requires that we continue to adapt our approach and iterate our response. We must learn from the current crisis and adjust our strategy to more effectively and proactively detect and respond to the next event. This will surely not be the last biological crisis this nation and this world faces. I'm particularly interested in how your organizations and the federal government writ large can more effectively use new data sets and artificial intelligence to truly modernize our biosurveillance efforts. We must mature our capacity to anticipate and monitor when and where a biological event may occur, and model how a pathogen, either naturally occurring or man-made, is likely to spread. This obviously must be a global effort, and the partnerships that the Department of Defense and Department of State have developed will be critical early warning beacons to inform our collective domestic response. Programs like the Cooperative Threat Reduction and specifically the Biological Threat Reduction Program are essential to maintaining our global footprint and the building of the relationships that protect our forward deployed service members and national interests. The current COVID crisis has served as an affirmation that biological threats require a whole of government response, not just the two departments represented here today, but inclusive of Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, and our state and local officials. The strength of the partnership between your organizations and the quality of these relationships you develop with our foreign partners and domestic agencies will underpin the effectiveness of our future biosecurity efforts. Thank you again to our witnesses, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Stefanik. And before I introduce the witnesses, I ask unanimous consent that non-committee members, if any, be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all committee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there objection? Without objection, non-committee members will be recognized at the appropriate time. Let me now go ahead and introduce our witnesses. First is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, Mr. David Lassiter. Mr. Lassiter oversees all CWMD policy issues at the department. This includes preventing the proliferation of WMD-related materials, the Defense Department's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, and chemical, biological, radiologic, and nuclear defense. Next, we will hear from the Director of Defense Threat Reduction Agency, Mr. Val Oxford. Mr. Oxford leads DTRA's mission to safeguard the U.S. and its allies from weapons of mass destruction. DTRA spearheads the Defense Department's Biological Threat Reduction Program. From the State Department, we will first hear from Acting Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, Mr. Jonathan Moore. And finally, we will hear from the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nonproliferation Programs at the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation, Mr. Philip Dolliff. He currently oversees a range of State Department nonproliferation programs, including cooperative threat reduction and export control programs, which work to reduce nonproliferation threats worldwide. I will now recognize each witness for 5 minutes, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be made part of the record. I will first call on Mr. Lassiter for his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Langevin and Barra, Ranking Member Stefanik, Acting Ranking Member Perry, and all committee members. I, too, want to extend my thoughts and prayers to the President and First Lady.
Mr. Lassiter, is your microphone on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's on. Can you hear me better now? First, I want to also extend my thoughts and prayers to the President and First Lady and all those impacted by COVID-19. Thank you for the opportunity to present on behalf of the Department of Defense and highlight some of the critical work we are doing to counter biological threats. I also want to acknowledge DoD's sincere appreciation for the continued support that Congress lends our threat reduction mission. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, I have the privilege to work alongside my colleagues here today. Our strong partnership enables the broad U.S. government effort to reduce WMD threats, including biological threats worldwide. DoD's biothreat mission aligns with the objectives in the national security and defense strategies, as well as Secretary Esper's priorities, namely to increase the lethality of the U.S. military, build alliances, and improve DoD's efficiency. We also draw guidance from strategies such as the National Biodefense Strategy and the Global Health Security Strategy. DoD's focus on protecting the health and readiness of U.S. forces, countering the destabilizing effects of outbreaks on U.S. interests, and ensuring that DoD remains focused on priority defense objectives to meet emergency needs during an outbreak makes us a complementary tool in the U.S. threat reduction arsenal. We work daily to ensure DoD is positioned to address the full range of WMD threats, to include the constantly changing biological threat landscape. This shifting dynamic includes naturally occurring outbreaks and accidental or deliberate release of biological agents, threats posed by state and non-state actors, international and domestic incidents, and concerns with existing and emerging technologies. COVID-19's global reach and destabilizing influence has further altered the threat landscape, potentially inspiring nefarious actors to replicate COVID's impacts through a deliberate use of a biological agent. My team developed strategic guidance for CWMD activities spanning the prevent, detect, and respond continuum to mitigate the impacts of such threats regardless of origin. We work closely with other DoD stakeholders and coordinate through groups such as our Unity of Effort Council and the COVID-19 Task Force. DoD also works with key interagency and international partners as we develop priorities for countering biological threats. These partnerships allow us to leverage each other's capabilities and lessen the security burden on DoD. Pooling resources and working towards common objectives is vital to ensuring the greatest threat reduction impacts are achieved. Since 2004, CTR's Biological Threat Reduction Program has provided equipment and training to over 30 countries to improve their ability to detect, diagnose, and report biological incidents. In the current environment, we know that partner nations have leveraged previously provided CTR capabilities to bolster their abilities to detect and diagnose COVID-19. To close, I want to thank the subcommittees again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lassiter. I'll now recognize Mr. Oxford for his opening statement.
Chairman Langevin, Chairman Barrow, Ranking Member Stefanik, Ranking Member Yoho, and Mr. Perry standing in this morning, and the distinguished members of the subcommittees, thank you for your continued support to DTRA. I'm proud to appear to you today with my colleagues from both DoD as well as the State Department to update you on our collective efforts to protect the U.S. national interest in a rapidly evolving globalized threat environment. It is an honor to represent the DTRA workforce whose commitment to our mission and strong relationships with our partners here today makes our organization successful. Today we find ourselves in unprecedented times as we respond to the global pandemic. As we reflect on the loss of over 200,000 of our fellow citizens, we must think about the future threat landscape where gene editing, DNA sequencing, and synthetic biology offer our adversaries the opportunity to capitalize on the observed lessons learned from our response, and they potentially could launch future attacks with little warning or attribution. As we capture our lessons learned from COVID-19 event, we have to accept the fact that others will also be learning and that the very nature of the biological threat landscape has changed forever. One of the lessons we have learned over the course of the last 6 months is that partner nations have benefited greatly by the training and equipping they received through the DoD CTR program and specifically Btrp. Btrp facilitates the detection and reporting of diseases caused by dangerous pathogens, whether deliberately released or naturally occurring, including diseases such as COVID-19. Btrp works with over 30 foreign partners to reduce biological threats by enhancing their biosecurity, biosafety, and biosurveillance capabilities. The ongoing COVID pandemic has demonstrated to the global community that health security is a critical part of national security. Countries need an effective biosurveillance system to detect, diagnose, and report outbreaks of dangerous pathogens. The U.S. relies on the biosurveillance systems of other nations to provide early warning of an outbreak before it reaches the homeland. Some recent examples of Btrp's success in responding to the pandemic: in partnership with USAID, Btrp's efforts enabled local officials in Thailand to detect the first case of a novel coronavirus outside of China on 13 January 2020, only days after its initial discovery in Wuhan, China. Within a month of a request from the U.S. Ambassador Fisher in Morocco, Btrp transferred a supply of PPE to the National Institute of Health and Hygiene in Rabat, Morocco. The equipment went directly to protect Morocco's frontline healthcare workers in the fight against COVID. Ambassador Fisher stated, "The equipment transfer is part of over 7 years of close cooperation between DTRA and the government of Morocco. This partnership's focus is on saving lives and mitigating threats to ensure the national security of both countries." I'll report to date, Morocco has reported 126,000 cases with 2,200 deaths. In Georgia, Btrp trained scientists in the Btrp-constructed Richard Lugar Center developed a diagnostic testing capability for COVID. This enabled Georgia to implement extensive testing to inform outbreak control. The center was lauded by the Georgian government as being integral in controlling the COVID outbreak. Within Georgia, they have reported 7,100 cases with only 46 deaths. Btrp continues to receive foreign partner requests for support related to COVID. As of September 18th, Btrp had fulfilled 40 requests from 18 countries plus the African Union for disease control. In summary, by building a partner nation's capacities and capabilities, it builds their sense of national pride and increases their willingness to work with the U.S. in other ways. By providing partners with better, self-sustaining solutions, the U.S. demonstrates that we are the partner of choice rather than our strategic competitors. These partnerships act as force multipliers in the competition for influence and reinforce the strategic messaging that the U.S. has their nation's interest in mind. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oxford. I'll now recognize Mr. Moore for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Bera, Chairman Langevin, Ranking Member Stefanik, and other esteemed members of the House. It is an honor to be here with you today, together with distinguished colleagues from the State Department and the Department of Defense, as well as DTRA. I look forward to discussing how our Bureau, the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, plays a role in this process. Our normal portfolio ranges from the depths of the oceans to the vastness of space. We also host the State Department's Office of International...
Mr. Moore, could I have you have the microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Sorry. Thank you. We also host the State Department's Office of International Health and Biodefense, and that is the capacity in which I'm here today. I will focus my remarks on our efforts to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks. COVID-19, which as we see has had an impact even on the President and the First Lady and millions of Americans, highlights the importance of U.S. leadership to advance global health security and pandemic preparedness. This is crucial to stopping outbreaks at their source and protecting U.S. health and safety, promoting economic prosperity, and defending national security interests. Our team at OES is working through and on COVID-19, together with interagency partners, advancing U.S. government priorities through diplomacy. Beyond COVID-19, OES combats a range of other public health threats, including Ebola, influenza, dengue, polio, and antimicrobial resistance. The COVID-19 pandemic is a global challenge, and the Department of State remains committed to working closely with our partners as part of a collective global response. We are using all of our means to slow and stop the pandemic. U.S. health diplomacy has two primary areas of effort: promoting transparent information sharing and disease surveillance, and encouraging a multi-sectoral approach to building global health security capacity, including other nations, non-governmental organizations, international organizations, and the private sector. We deeply appreciate Congress's appropriation of over $1.6 billion US dollars in COVID-19 supplemental funding to the State Department and to the U.S. Agency for International Development. We have used these funds to provide a broad range of assistance specifically aimed at helping governments, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations fight the pandemic. The assistance is saving lives by strengthening public health education, improving the quality and cleanliness of healthcare facilities, and increasing laboratory, disease surveillance, and rapid response capacity in more than 120 countries, as well as providing humanitarian and economic support to mitigate impacts of the pandemic. Additionally, the United States has invested more than $10 billion to bring safe and effective vaccines to the global market faster. OES helps develop State Department messaging, including global public health, in countering malign influence. As the first to know about the coronavirus, the Chinese Communist Party had a special responsibility to inform the rest of the world about this threat. Instead, they withheld information and censored medical professionals, scientists, and journalists. The CCP has since used the pandemic to further its geopolitical agenda by highlighting its donations of masks and other supplies to reshape the narrative and distract from its role in this crisis. Both Russia and the CCP have made grandiose and irresponsible claims about the creation of vaccines, raising serious questions about quality and efficacy that we are addressing through active public diplomacy. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is a proverb that is as familiar as it is true. If we prioritize health security investments, we can contain outbreaks before they become pandemics and mitigate and prevent second and third order impacts. OES plays a key role in pandemic prevention, including through support for the global health security agenda. GHSA, which is still a work in progress, is a partnership of nearly 70 nations, international organizations, and non-governmental stakeholders that uses a whole-of-government, multi-sectoral approach to address outbreaks. OES annually coordinates U.S. expert implementing agencies to provide carefully targeted programming in priority countries to make global health security improvements along specific metrics. Its approach to combating outbreaks is reflected in the United States 2017 National Security Strategy, 2018 National Biodefense Strategy, and the 2019 Global Health Security Strategy. OES leadership has been fully engaged in coordinating interagency investments, helping 19 U.S. partner countries prevent, detect, and respond to a range of infectious disease threats at their source. These are just a few examples of OES's wide-ranging engagement on infectious disease risks, which are crucial to countering biological threats, We greatly appreciate your interest and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Let me now recognize Mr. Dolph for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Bera, Chairman Langevin, ranking members, and honorable representatives. We appreciate the leadership you've shown on these important issues. Thank you for inviting me here today to share how the Department of State's Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation, or ISN, works to address some of the most urgent and challenging biological threats to U.S. national security. I'm honored to appear before you alongside my colleague from the Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs Bureau and by my colleagues from the Department of Defense. Through diplomatic efforts and foreign assistance programs, the International Security and Nonproliferation Bureau works to prevent rogue states, terrorists, and other malign actors from obtaining and using weapons of mass destruction. The International Security and Nonproliferation Bureau has been working hard for nearly 20 years to address challenges posed by the full spectrum of these threats, whether they are deliberately spread, accidentally released, or naturally occurring. The COVID-19 pandemic is a grim reminder of how much damage a single pathogen can cause to U.S. national and international security. Through diplomacy, our International Security and Nonproliferation Bureau strengthens multilateral frameworks, including the Biological Weapons Convention and the Australia Group. And I note the Chairman made remarks on this very issue. This year, as the President of the G7, we are leading the international community in making significant progress on biological issues, including issuing G7 statements on the international COVID-19 pandemic and response. Similarly, in the global partnership, we have led efforts to launch a dedicated biosecurity capacity building initiative. For decades, ISN has invested significant resources into combating the full range of WMD and related delivery system threats, including over $450 million over the past 15 years toward mitigating biological threats. We have a long and rich history of biosecurity capacity building where we have trained thousands of foreign partners on biosecurity in over 50 countries. These WMD threat reduction investments long preceded the pandemic, yet they are contributing to slowing its spread. We recognized early on the threat that the pandemic posed to our international security, and we began to quickly incorporate COVID-19 topics in our trainings, leveraging remote and distance learning platforms to deliver critically needed help in a timely manner. We're also in the process of programming an additional $18 million via our Nonproliferation and Disarmament Fund towards controlling this pandemic and preventing future catastrophic biological events, as well as adding additional experts to our efforts and expanding the offices we have working on these issues. Representative Perry noted moments ago that there are limitations to our authorities, and I will note that we did propose a broader authority to address these limitations. Of course, we are not alone, and we are deeply grateful for the decades of very close partnership we've enjoyed with our Department of Defense colleagues to coordinate our mutually reinforcing efforts. In looking to the future, we are also working hard to keep pace with the rapidly evolving changes in biotechnology, and I note that several of the members indicated concern about this very issue. Let me assure you, the full range of U.S. national security departments and agencies are focusing on and analyzing these efforts. Our International Security and Nonproliferation Bureau is using our diplomatic and capacity-building tools to prevent the application of dual-use technologies to do harm, such as the development of biological weapons. For example, Chairman Bera noted moments ago the importance of standards and norms to address this issue, and we are indeed working in this area and have had multilateral dialogues on this very issue. In conclusion, we are very proud of the work we do to combat infectious disease threats using our diplomatic and foreign assistance tools in support of U.S. national security. We deeply appreciate the support of the Congress to provide us with the necessary resources to carry out our threat reduction mission, and we recognize that our work is far from over. Thank you, Chairman Bera, Chairman Langevin, members of the committee. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Dolph. I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each, and pursuant to House rules, all time yielded is for the purposes of questioning our witnesses. Because of the hybrid format of this hearing, I will recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans and between both subcommittees. If you miss your turn, please let our staff know and we will circle back to you. If you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Both Mr. Oxford and Mr. Dolph, talked about, the advances in technology. And as a doctor, I look at what we've been able to do with biologics, conditions, cancers that, we would have to treat palliatively. We now actually have therapies and precision medicine to often cure some of these cancers and other ailments. And I think the vast majority of scientists are pursuing and using this technology for the advancement of common good. But I also know that those same gene editing techniques and so forth can certainly be used to cause us harm, as well as inadvertently, a scientist that may be looking for a cure may inadvertently create something that unintentionally causes harm. Mr. Dolph, you touched on, as I said in my opening statement, how do we create these norms for and standards for ethical use of this technology in a multilateral way, and then also working with our corporate sector as well, because obviously, our pharmaceutical sector and others are looking for novel therapies. And, right now, I get the sense that there really isn't the standard and norm. And maybe you could start off, Mr. Dolph, and then from the DoD perspective, how we do this in a multilateral way.
So thank you, Chairman Bera, for raising this important set of questions. First, I take your point. Medical technology is indeed advancing very quickly, especially in some parts of the biosector. And we face this challenge across the board with technologies. Almost all technologies have applications, as you point out, for enormous good and can cause substantial harm. We have been working on the issue of norms and standards for over a decade, and what we have done is tried to work through, amongst other instrumentalities, the national academies and cooperation with national academies in other countries. We've engaged other international organizations to try to address this subject, and we've also worked in partnership with other governments. We have included working with the corporate sector, and we, for example, we work closely with partners in India. And in those outreach and trainings that we do in India, we include both the government sector and the corporate sector, as well as NGOs, as we try to build biosecurity, including through building norms. I will note, I think building norms is always challenging, and it's probably at least as challenging at the moment in the midst of the pandemic. But I take the Chairman's point that this is a particularly important area, and we will continue to increase our efforts in this area.
Great. And Mr. Moore touched on the billions that we've already provided in global health security funding in some of the COVID-19 supplementals. And no doubt, as we look to defeat this virus, both here domestically through vaccine distribution and development, but also globally, maybe I'll look at some of the DoD colleagues or Mr. Moore, if you want to answer this. As we're spending that, how can we do that in a very strategic way that allows us to start building the surveillance tools? And what should those tools look like, and what's the best practice? Maybe Mr. Lassiter, if you want.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very important. And I would just add on the biotechnology front that we view it as a promise and peril scenario. So there's a whole lot of promise, and the U.S. bioeconomy is strong. We must keep it number one. And there is a lot of peril, which you and Das Dolph have described. From a vaccine standpoint, as you asked, it's vitally important that we continue to work as an interagency together. We've also got to provide information, flow information across international organizations, those that have been mentioned previously. But it's incumbent upon us to share the information. So we work with our partners and allies, and we expect dependable, clear information to come back, and that's vital. If we're not sharing the information, and if we're not doing it effectively and clearly, then we run the risk of having more severe outbreaks as the technology advances and as the globalized economy increases.
Mr. Oxford, do you want to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As an implementing organization, we're in a position to help train, educate, and enforce some of the norms that would be created. But I point out that in today's biological threat world, it's really hard to distinguish between nation-state, non-nation states, and their proxies in terms of who is responsible for these actions. So getting to norms is a much more complicated issue. In the past, where we had mostly nation-states where we'd worry about this, now we have a much bigger playing field to try to figure out. And that complicates not only norms and standards, it complicates attribution and accountability for these kind of things. So I think it's a noble goal, but it's much more complicated in the kind of diverse world we're facing.
Great. Thank you. I see my time's up. Let me recognize the ranking member, acting ranking member, Mr. Perry.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman, and to our panel. Thank you. My questions, Mr. Oxford just mentioned some of the non-state actors, and I'm going to talk about some of the non-state and the state actors. So, as you know, in 2018, Russian agents used the Soviet-developed Novichok-class nerve agent in an attempted assassination of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom, and early this year it was used again against opposition figure Alexei Navalny. I wonder what we can, it's hard to prove, right? We're pretty sure, but it's hard to prove. It's kind of like the coronavirus and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We got some pretty strong opinions about it, but it's hard to prove them. How can we, or how can the international community enforce accountability for state actors who do such things?
So, Mr. Perry, that's a really tough question, as you know. I mean, just getting to the accountability on this case, and that's why I mentioned accountability in my previous comment. A lot of this can be denied. The actual scientific evidence, wasn't necessarily shared immediately with us. We do now have people in this country that have been provided some of the samples, so we're able to get in there and actually do some of the assessments. So, as Mr. Lasser said, a lot of this is about agreements on information sharing, so we rapidly come together as allies to be able to actually put the blame where it's necessary. But it's a very hard problem, given that we haven't spent enough time and effort in this country on bioattribution. We've spent years on nuclear attribution, but we've not spent any time on bioattribution.
Yeah, watching what happened to Skripal and now Navalny and others, quite honestly, we tend to think that happens over there, so to speak. But the UK is obviously a close friend and an ally, and I find that exceptionally concerning. And I understand. I'm sure you're thinking about it. I just don't know if you had any answers to impart. And maybe they don't. If you have some, you don't want to have on open source. Did you have something to add there, Mr. Lasser?
Well, sir, I would just say that the further use, obviously a chemical weapon, but the further use and seemingly acceptability across the world has to be confronted. As Director Oxford said, there's significant effort being put into this particular incident across the U.S. government and across the international community. So efforts are underway to at least work on the international norm piece or response. I would say that you mentioned threats, and from the biological threat perspective, although much information would be required at a higher level, we can say at an unclassified level that Russia, at least the State Department, has said that there's no way to confirm their adherence to the Biological Weapons Convention. Pretty certain that China is not adhering to it, both from an Article 1 and Article 2 perspective. So it grows and grows in concern, and the help of Congress and across the interagency is vital to get after these threats.
Okay, so, and I appreciate, look, I know it's difficult, and that's why we're here. So we appreciate your efforts in this regard and any help that we can offer. On the non-state actor side, you got anything from a recently arrested Canadian woman crossing into the United States and mailing the President of the United States and a sheriff in Texas a letter containing rice, and we've seen similar things in the past. But we've also seen the Islamic State procure, I think there was a mustard gas attack in northern Iraq in 2015 and 2016. Now, when I was in Iraq, this stuff was quite honestly fairly prevalent, so it's no should be no surprise how they found that. But in those two instances, I'm just wondering what the status of the illicit chemical weapons trade or bio weapons trade or availability of things like ricin, and how you guys are working with either overseas counterparts or among each other to, I mean, maybe not even overseas, right? Canada's right across the border. So what are you guys doing with those type of things, and what's the status of that, the trade?
So Mr. Perry, I can tell you in the Middle East scenario, what we've seen through the counterterrorism activities, we've been able to take most of the chemical expertise off the battlefield, so to speak. They've tried to resurrect periodically, but they've not been successful. So it's a matter of the expertise. Ricin has been attempted multiple times. Usually it's never gotten to weapons grade. So maybe we've dodged a bullet, but there is the need to look across that spectrum. And the terrorist groups have had this intention. They just haven't had the expertise, and we need to make sure that they don't gain that expertise.
Mr. Dole.
If I could add to that a little bit. On the diplomatic side, we have worked very closely with international partners against this particular threat. We also have programmatic elements working in key states to address this specific set of non-state threats. We have diplomatic efforts. We've integrated our concerns about WMD into broader international diplomatic discussions about counterterrorism. With regard to your question about trade, we do strengthen international controls on chemical and biological precursors. But I will say that in general, I believe the evidence is that much of these efforts uses chemicals and precursors that are procured within a state. So we will continue to tighten up in that area, but most of it appears homegrown.
Thank you. My time's expired. I yield.
Let me go ahead and now recognize Chairman Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses again for their testimony and the important work that you're doing in this area on behalf of the country. I want to go back in my opening statement. I talked about the concerns I had about the significant cut to the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. So compared to the 2020 levels, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program was cut by $135 million in the President's budget request this year. And within that program, the Cooperative Biological Engagement effort was cut the most by over $55 million. So given the pandemic in which we find ourselves, we're alarmed by the Department of Defense's significant cut to this mission of detecting and confronting biological threats in the United States. So I want to begin, Director Oxford, this is a program that Congress clearly supports. What additional work would Btrp be able to perform if Congress is in fact able to restore the funding to the FY20 enacted level, and especially what other work would you be able to do under the Bio Threat Reduction Program, which was cut the most? And to Mr. Lassiter, I want to know how the department's perspective of the importance of the Biological Threat Reduction Program evolved over the past 6 months of the pandemic, and how is the department surged to support the COVID-19 fight? But let's start with Director Oxford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, based on the HASS mark, we've looked at the programs. We'd be able to restore activities in 22 countries with the entire HASS mark. In addition, 15 of those would be within the Btrp program. We can provide the committees with the specific examples of what countries would be restored. Plus, we'd be able to restore activities on a regional basis with EUCOM, CENTCOM, as well as AFRICOM and INDOPACOM. So we'd be able to restore some of the regional emphasis in this area, which gives us broader coverage across those regions in question. But we would be able to restore activities for Btrp in 15 countries as well as those regions I mentioned.
Very good. Obviously, we're going through the conference process with the Senate, and also we're dealing still with appropriations, but it is our intent to restore that funding. Mr. Lassiter, on the question of the 6 months of the pandemic and how your work has evolved.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. If I could add that we do want to give appreciation. I know the witnesses have, for the long-standing support that these committees, and then both sides of the hill, both sides of the aisle have given towards cooperative threat reduction program. And I would say that the biological threat reduction program, as you know, has been operating for over 16 years in over 30 countries, doing great work. And as far as the last 16 months, so the DoD effort, obviously the international effort is led by our colleagues, the State Department.
The last 6 months, yeah.
And USAID, yes, sir. And from a DoD perspective, managed through the Stability and Humanitarian Affairs Office. And so they manage it over the course of the last 6 months, nearly about $100 million in DoD support to over 100 countries. As it relates specifically to BTRP, as you know, most of the support is historical in nature. So, a lot of the training, a lot of the lab support has been over the course of this 16 years to these willing partners. And so that work, that information flow is what's most vital. I can say specifically, for BTRP, direct funding in response to COVID is around $7 million. Much of it is PPE, but a lot of it is training, and it goes back to the historical relationships with these countries, where we provide robust training and information flow. And so that has been the focus, is making sure that these partner countries know they have a reach back resource and that we can, and Director Oxford's team can provide that information to those partner nations.
Director Oxford, let me go back to you. We all, of course, appreciate all of DTRA's efforts to lean forward on this COVID fight. Can you tell us about the work DTRA has been doing to help with the COVID R&D effort through Chem Bio Defense program funding? DARPA early on was using its R&D funding early on to meet the challenge, the crisis. Describe what you've been able to do, or have you been hamstrung because of lack of support or authorities?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think a lot of people have made comparisons between our response to Ebola versus the COVID threat. The Ebola pathogen was declared as a threat pathogen by CDC, which allowed DoD to expend its resources against a threat. COVID-19, as considered a pandemic and a disease, prevented us from using Chem Bio Defense program money, but we have used our expertise in several ways. Using CARES Act money, we've been able to actually benefit from that. We have a program underway that is looking at rapid assessment of environments. We call it the RATE program. In this case, using wearable technologies, we're looking at identifying the onset of symptoms and illnesses, not specifically COVID, but would give us some advance notice that illness may be on the way 48 hours earlier than projected, so the appropriate testing could take place. So our expertise has been applied, but not specifically the Chem Bio Defense funding.
I know my time's expired, but thank you. We obviously have some work to do in these areas and strengthen the authorities. You should be able to use those R&D funds at a time like this, and we'll work with you to make sure that happens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me now recognize my good friend, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first question, I think is probably for Mr. Oxford. I was just wondering if you can help us understand, with regards to the biological threat, kind of what that role is for DTRA for response, and then what that role is for DTRA in terms of contributing to the future thinking about what to do. Are you strictly responding to requests, or do you have a role in planning ahead and proliferating that information about what to do when you plan ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We actually play two roles in the CTR program. We're actually not really in a response role, but in the COVID environment, as Mr. Lasser said, the year's worth of work that we had done to prepare some of those nations, they were able to rapidly respond. They needed an infusion of some capabilities, for example, PPE, test kits, and those kind of things. Morocco specifically, there were 199 trained laboratory technicians that we had trained through the CTR program. So with $100,000 worth of PPE, we were able to get them in a situation where they could start doing the response. So we're not really a response program in that regards, but we are able to benefit from what we've done over the decades or so of working with them. In the Chem Defense program, we're actually on the cutting edge of all the research and development. So we are looking forward, as we've made reference, things like synthetic bio. We fully understand, based on the technical expertise, what the nefarious ways that synthetic bio could be used. So on the flip side, we're also looking for the offensive advantage that we might gain by understanding synthetic bio, by making detectors better, able to resolve things faster. So we do have that forward look through the science and technology program that we operate.
Yeah, and Mr. Lassiter, kind of on that point, there's two approaches. One is, I noted in your testimony, in your written testimony, you talk about how you're organized and your role in cooperation with the Department of Defense, R&E, Research and Engineering. Can you discuss that a little bit? And second, and I don't know if this would be for Mr. Lassiter or Mr. Oxford, the combination of where emerging technologies meet. I think as Mr. Lassiter's written testimony, a discussion about drone technology and dissemination of biological agents. Maybe you could touch on that, what we ought to be thinking about in the future.
Thank you, Congressman Larson. Appreciate the questions very much. Very important. We are spending, quite a bit of time and resources across the department. So I had mentioned research and engineering. They're vital to the efforts to ensure we have going forward what we need, what our warfighters need to fight and win a contaminated environment. As Director Oxford noted, the Chem Bio Defense program is vital in that. With respect to some of these technologies, they are concerning. The department, though, is right-sized and fitted to respond to them. So the way we are organized, at least across the CWMD enterprise, quite robust. A number of organizations, as you can imagine, from the Joint Staff, from our policy perspective, the combatant commands, the services. So we come together fairly regularly in an effort that I think would be highlighted, and it's important for you to know about, is the CWMD Unity of Effort Council, 3-star level council. Director Oxford and I obviously participate in that. And in that forum, we're able to flow these issues up for discussion and decision. It's an area that we can get full information across the department and make decisions at the highest level. And so we think that is vital to some of these issues that you highlight. Now, obviously, in this setting, a little harder to get into some of those issues. I know you recognize that. But we are resourced properly, and we're right-sized to go after those threats, sir.
If I could just follow up on a part of that. You obviously, you don't run DOD's research and engineering. That's another division. It's pretty high up, obviously, in the org chart at the Pentagon. Do you have that opportunity, not the opportunity, has R&E come to recognize this as a higher priority now, or is this something you're having to battle out with research engineering in their list of priorities that they've already had?
Well, I speak fairly regularly with Dr. Michelle Rosa, who covers down on this issue set. As you recognize, a lot of tremendous talent at the department across the intelligence community that flows us information on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. So if we need to flex, and that's one thing that Mr. Oxford, Director Oxford's organization, DTRA, they're very agile. So if we need to adjust to go after a threat, we can do it. But we do welcome the interest and support of Congress in doing so.
Well, we welcome giving you the support and more importantly, the interest in doing so. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me recognize the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our witnesses. I was, as a member of both Armed Services and Foreign Affairs, I want to thank you both for having this joint hearing. But I want to address, how the sharing that was mentioned by the witnesses before of information is critical. And so I want to ask, as the COVID-19 pandemic progressed and military intelligence followed it and saw that escalation, just from a time frame, what kinds of levels of alert occurred in January and February during that period? Was there a change in the level of alert based on our military intelligence during that period? And did it occur in January and February or February?
Thank you, sir, for that question. What I can tell you is that in February, Secretary Esper identified 3 priorities to combat COVID. First, being to protect our people. Second, to maintain mission readiness. And 3, to ensure that we were supporting the whole of government effort. With that came, at least internally within DOD, different health protection levels. And so pretty early, as you'll probably recall, in March, at least as it relates to the Department of Defense, we were put in HPCON situation that reduced the number of folks present at their jobs. So with that, information flow did happen and does happen. I think we've pointed out, all of us here today, that information flow is vital. While the intelligence community can collect and does collect information, analyzes it and gets it out to policymakers and to include Congress, there must be flow of information across the entire globe, and it must happen from all parties and all countries. We can't expect just the United States and our allies. Yes, sir. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Just to get to the, was there a level of alert change that corresponded with that in as early as February?
Well, sir, as early as February, in March was when I believe, and I'd have to go back for the exact date, but that's when the HPCON changed. Obviously, over the course of those months before, information was continuing to flow, and the proper resources applied to analyzing that information.
Was there a change to a level 1 alert in February?
Sorry,
that would have been the first time in our history that a pandemic raised itself to that level. Did that occur?
Sir, I can't tell you the exact date. I'd need to go back and get that and provide that information to you in the committee, please.
Let's assume that it might have. Would you transfer that information immediately to our state agencies and our agencies of State Department, and Congress?
Sir, as you know, the intelligence community is quite large, and so all the organizations today have an intelligence portion to them, and so that information is shared across the intelligence community. I say that, but information generally is shared across the intelligence community, and so we do that on a daily basis, and we flow information back and forth.
I see. Well, my concern is that Congress was not notified in as timely a fashion to those changes. So if you could get back to the respective committees, tie down that date and what the significance was. Because it's my understanding in terms of what's publicly accessible that there was a change. It's my understanding that it was historic in terms of the first time a pandemic was addressed with that level of change. And I'm concerned about the sharing of information, which was slow to Congress, whether it was also slow to our other State Department agencies and relevant agencies and the agencies appearing before the committee here today. Because indeed, if we are going to do this, what you've said as witnesses, placing the importance on sharing that information, it's critical. And it's my concern that that was not being done in a timely fashion. So if you get back to us, I would appreciate that. That, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Let me recognize my good friend from the state of California, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. There's been discussion, I believe, by the first-ranking member to the, quote, complicity of the WHO. The WHO is a coordinating organization. It's not an intel organization. It has no way to know whether what China is saying is complete and true and transparent or not. You know who does have an intel organization? the United States government. And our intelligence is designed to know when China is not telling the truth. In fact, the president was informed that this was breaking out in Wuhan far more than the Chinese government indicated. He chose to ignore that, that intelligence, just as he seems to have ignored much to the unfortunate harm to himself and his wife, ignored the best advice on how to avoid getting this disease, and unfortunately misled millions of Americans as well into not wearing masks. We spend many hundreds of billions of dollars defending ourselves from kinetic threats, and very little on defending ourselves from anything else. We have did not have civil defense designed for either a deliberate or naturally occurring plague. We did not have stockpiles of PPE. We did not have the education. We did not have the ventilators, although we quickly made some. And we did not have the capacity to do tracing. This all in spite of the fact that the national security strategy recognized that biological incidents have this was in 2017, the potential to cause catastrophic loss of life, and the threats are growing, whether as a result of deliberate attack, accident, or natural outbreak. Which raises the question, and I know we're not in a classified setting, what is the administration's operating assumptions or likelihood, or how would we assign percentage likelihoods to the four possibilities as to how this plague began? We're told perhaps it came from the wet market, and it may have come from the Wuhan lab, which might have been engaged in entirely peaceful activities and had a tragic release. It could have come from a Wuhan lab that was engaged in military activities but had an unintentional release. And I think least likely at all, it could have come deliberately from a Wuhan lab. Do we have any operating assumptions, or all of those possible, although I think the deliberate release is highly, highly unlikely? Where does the administration think is the cause of this?
Thank you, Congressman Sherman. It's an important question. I think we are, we as an international community, but obviously the U.S. government, are still we're working right now, presently, to respond to this crisis, as you well.
So you're saying any one of those possibilities is possible, and the U.S. government doesn't have much of an opinion on which is the cause? Do the other witnesses agree to that? Mr. Moore?
Congressman Sherman, thank you for the question. You have mentioned four possible scenarios, and certainly in discussions in an open forum, there are varying levels of plausibility. What we do know is that the virus described as COVID-19 was described in academic research that was published several years ago, including in the People's Republic of China, identified as existing in animals. It is a disease, it is a virus of zoonotic origin, but exactly as you say, sir, there are multiple.
So the idea that it was engineered is probably dismissed by that, and I'll quickly ask, normally when there's a catastrophe, the first thing anybody does is you close the barn door. China has said that this has come from a wet market. There are wet markets all over China. Has there been a massive change in how exotic animals are sold for human consumption throughout China?
That's an extremely important point, and also something under the purview of the OES Bureau at State. Wildlife trafficking is a huge problem. The People's Republic of China continues to be the largest market for illegal.
Has there been a big change from early 2019 to
now late 2020, in how these markets operate.
There has not been
China.
a fundamental permanent change in blocking illegal wildlife trade, including its sale at wet markets in the People's Republic of China. It's a practice which does exist in other countries as well, and we are working to end it.
Thank you.
Let me now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this super important hearing. It's no secret to the rest of the world that the COVID-19 pandemic was allowed to spiral out of control when it reached the United States. Only 200,000 Americans died. Case counts were falling months ago, but the New York Times reported this week that case counts are again climbing at around the same pace as when New York City cases were skyrocketing way back in March. The whole world can see this happening, including those who wish to do harm to our country. So let me pose this question to Mr. Oxford and Mr. Moore. Do you believe that there will be a heightened interest on the part of state and non-state actors in developing and employing biological weapons against Americans? And if yes, how will the Departments of State and Defense, respectively, prepare for that possibility?
I apologize, sir. The transmission was a little imprecise. What exact question would you like me to respond to, sir?
Sorry about that. My question is, do you think there will be a heightened interest on the part of state and non-state actors in developing and employing biological weapons against Americans? And if yes, how will the Departments of State and Defense prepare for that possibility?
With regard to the development of biological weapons, I think that would be better addressed to my colleague, Mr. Dolliff, from the ISN Bureau.
Okay.
This is a difficult question to address in an unclassified context. I guess what I can say is that we continually review these issues. We had a discussion 2 days ago with our colleagues who are experts on these issues. I think I take your point that the pandemic, as I testified to, poses a substantial, enormous challenge to international security, and it must inherently be the case that our adversaries, whether they're terrorists or states, will take that into account in considering how to evolve their weapon systems.
All right, let me another question. Since January of 2017, the CDC's presence in China has decreased from about 47 personnel to 14, with epidemiologists and health professionals getting cut. The National Science Foundation and USAID also closed their Beijing offices during this time, and on top of that, the Department of Agriculture transferred the manager of an animal disease monitoring program out of China in 2018. So over the past 4 years, we've gotten rid of a bunch of people who, it seems to me, would have been helpful to have in place as COVID-19 was emerging. At the very least, I think it would be helpful to have reliable sources of information about what was really happening on the ground. Mr. Oxford and Mr. Moore, in general, why does the U.S. have experts like epidemiologists stationed in other countries, and how does this help defend us against biological threats?
So again, from a Defense Department perspective, especially as an implementing organization, you know, we're not responsible for where CDC and others operate overseas, so I would have to yield to either State Department or go back to those other departments that do those kind of things.
All right, let's hear the state perspective.
Thank you, sir. We'd be pleased to offer a more detailed timeline of who was assigned under the authority of the Chief of Mission in Beijing at what time. I think the context for individual agencies sending staff there or reducing their staff there has a lot to do with both their their needs, their budgets, and of course, the viability of the work that they can actually do. One of the constraints we face with regard to the People's Republic of China is that we still have not received all of the data we would need to receive initial samples of the virus that have been sought since the beginning of the pandemic, even at the end of last year. That is extremely problematic, as is the work of the People's Republic of China to prevent the World Health Organization from declaring COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern when that topic initially came up for discussion at the WHO in Geneva. With regard to the specific agencies, with apologies, I'd have to take that question.
All right, well, Mr. Chairman, I'll close by saying that I think it's extremely problematic for us to talk about what the WHO should do when we withdraw from it. I think it's extremely problematic for us to reduce our capability, scientific and diplomatic and public health expertise in China and around the world during a global pandemic. And with that, with great thanks, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Levin. Since there are no Republicans in the room right now, the chair now recognizes Spanberger for 5 minutes. Oh, I think Ms. Spanberger is having some technical issues. She either, okay. Well, I'm told that there are no other members in the room right now. So I would suggest, is Mr. Chairman Barrett planning to come back after voting? And should we recess right now? I'm waiting to hear back from committee staff.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Larson. I'm the only member in the room right now, and Representative Barrett is voting. And we're trying to get staff to answer your question about his return. So folks who just want to, okay. We won't recess right now, perhaps, so just give us a few minutes.
Well, I'm going to, what I'll do then, if I'll ask another question that I have. I don't know if we're going to get to a second round now, but until we get that clarified or Ms. Barrett comes back on, then I'll certainly yield to her. But in the meantime, let me go to Mr. Lassiter. So we've heard that there might have been direction to not spend ChemBio defense program funding on the COVID-19 fight, which troubles me if true. Even though the program specializes in developing countermeasures and vaccines, therapeutics, and pretreatments, what do you need from us to ensure that you have the authorities and the resources needed so that the department is in fact prepared to rise to the challenge of emerging threats both today and tomorrow? And is there work that you could be doing now to help the country in the COVID-19 fight that you don't currently have the authority or permission to do?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For your first question or your statement, there is no department prohibition or preclusion. I'll say that the ChemBio Defense Program primary focus is on statutory requirements to develop and deliver capabilities that ensure the warfighter's ability to fight and win in a chemical or biological contaminated environment. The COVID-19 support provided to the services and interagency is a combination of subject matter expertise, leveraging existing contracts to expedite delivery of capabilities, as an example, assisting with testing and evaluation, from helping to create detection, diagnostics, and treatment methods to investigating vaccines. The ChemBio Defense Program continues to collaborate with the whole of government partners, industry, and academia. It's important to note that the ChemBio Defense Program is a research, development, and acquisition program, and not necessarily a response capability. But I will say to your follow-on question, sir, that the Congress has been exceptionally helpful to the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program historically, as I referenced earlier, and over the last number of years. And so support that we'd ask for is really continued support for the program. We appreciate the information flow between our department, and I think I can say the same for State Department, and between our staffs. It's exceptional, and we look forward to continuing that communication flow. Thank you, sir.
And no additional authorities that you're asking for right now that you would enhance your work?
So I think at the moment we're good. I know that our staffs have communicated historically, and I hope that they can continue to do that, pardon me. And if we do identify an issue or an authority that is necessary, we'll be absolutely certain to bring that to you and your team.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes my questions for right now. Has anyone from the minority returned yet, or Ms. Spanberger, has she returned? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Rick Larson again. Still the only member in the room.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Larson. I'll yield now to Ms. Spanberger if she's returned. Good. Okay, I understand that she is not on.
Can you hear me, Mr. Landsman?
Yes, yeah, I have you now. Go ahead, Ms. Spanberger. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Excellent. So thank you very much to the witnesses for being here. I appreciate your time and your presence. I have a question about staffing related issues. As a former CIA case officer, I'm aware of the importance of detecting threats before they actually harm Americans, and that must be our approach when it comes to biological security as well. We have to get in front of biological and health security risks before they can do significant damage, like what we've seen with COVID-19. And we have to work with our partners so that no matter where a threat arises, we can contain it. And if the offices in charge of preventing and responding to these threats are understaffed, it is hard for us to get ahead of that problem. So I open this up to all members of the panel. U.S. national security agencies have long suffered from high rates of vacancies in the past few years. And given how long federal hiring can take, we are likely to see ripple effects of this for years. Are vacancies or limited staffing affecting your work currently? And in your view, how can state and DoD reform hiring practices to ramp up to the needed capacity more quickly? And a specific call out on there, do your offices have trouble finding and recruiting staff with the specialized skills needed to focus on reducing biological security threats? And I open it up to the panelists.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spanberger. It's a great question. It's an age-old issue, employing the right staff. I can say from a CWND perspective, we have an immensely talented team full of professionals from career civilians to uniformed personnel to government contractors. So it'd be hard to speak across the entire department, me personally doing that, but I can tell you that we're right-sized. We obviously always are looking or on the lookout for talent, and so we'll continue to do that and continue to if we can find talent, to bring them in the doors. I'll defer to my other colleagues.
Ms. Spanberger, from a Btrp point of view, we operate a highly technical organization similar to some of the career fields you're referring to. Our recruitment strategy is healthy. Our retention rates are healthy, but we continue to look for additional talent as necessary. But so far, our attribution rates or our rates are going, steady. So I think in a chem biodefense area that we operate, as well as the rest of our R&D organization, our health and welfare of the R&D community is very sound.
Thank you.
Ms. Spanberger, on behalf of the OES Bureau at the State Department, I'm very pleased to report we have an outstanding, very active, and extremely expert team of both civil service, long-term colleagues, and foreign service colleagues on usually 2-year assignments. I'm pleased to say that in recent months we've been able to add to our staffing and bring on permanently a number of colleagues, including fellows from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The State Department has a long-standing cooperation with AAAS so that we benefit from their technical and professional expertise. The team is doing an outstanding job both dealing with COVID on the home front and, of course, working on it professionally. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Phil Dahl from State. I think I'd echo the remarks of my colleagues. I think that vacancies have not been a substantial challenge in our part of the department on this issue. As I testified, we have also been increasing our staff. We've added experts using a special authority that the department has provided in this regard, and we've added to the staffing of the offices that deal with biological issues. So I think in general, we don't have staffing challenges. We too have a great partnership and fellowships that bring us technical expertise, but I think recruiting technical specialists is sometimes a challenge, and that is probably the one area where at times it has been a bit of a challenge for us.
Thank you very much for sharing that, and I hope the committee can be involved to whatever end is appropriate in ensuring that you all can, into the future, recruit to the staffing levels that are necessary. I'm going to ask for the next portion, if you'll indulge me, because it'll direct what my follow-up question is. By a show of hands, do your teams participate in a war game exercise to train and prepare potential biological security risks? For the ease in this awkward circumstance with virtual and present, if you could just raise your hands if you do, because my follow-up question depends very much on if it's divided or. So I see 2 and 2 from here, 3 and okay. So I'm curious then, with the majority of you participating in war games, do you and your colleagues draw upon the modeling and the simulation analysis to think through what quickly changing threats could look like and how to respond? Are you using this for biological threats? And what have you learned from these tabletop exercises recently as it relates to COVID-19? And my time is limited, so if one of you want to take this one, I welcome you all to choose who goes next.
So, Congresswoman, this is Mr. Oxford from Btrp. One of the things we do to sustain capability overseas with the people that we've trained over the course of time in bioresponses, we do exercises periodically just to make sure they're maintaining readiness and their standards that they've been trained to. It's one of the ways that we start to transfer the responsibility of the CTR program to those host nations. But exercises and training are one of the key aspects of us understanding that the retention is there.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thanks for the extra time. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Spanberger. Seeing that there are no additional members who have questions, and obviously it's always difficult in this virtual hybrid in-person format, and then toss on top of that, votes getting called. So, I'm going to use the chair's prerogative and just make a closing statement, and then see if Chairman Langevin would like to make a statement as well, but or actually maybe a closing question. The issue of biosurveillance, and it's something that I've thought a lot about in terms of pandemic preparedness, et cetera, and thinking about how we use some of the naturally occurring technologies that are out there, social media, search words, Google, et cetera. If all of a sudden you see a jump in people searching incidents of fever or flu-like symptoms, et cetera, some of that can be early warning systems for us to pay close attention. I know wireless thermometers, et cetera. We're thinking about how both in the midst of the pandemic, but then also, what are early warning systems for naturally occurring threats, but, that are already there and widely in use. I don't know if folks from DOD or state could perhaps comment on how we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, Chairman Barrett, it's an exceptional question, and it's an all-of-the-above approach. And we've all talked today about the information sharing. That's absolutely vital. It's fundamental if we're going to ensure that we're detecting, interdicting, but specifically on this issue, detecting threats and flowing that information really at this point globally. And so, it's working with our interagency colleagues like we do on a daily basis here. It's also working with our international friends and partners. And I know Phil Dolliff, Das Dolliff had mentioned the Global Partnership for Spread Against Weapons of Mass Destruction and those materials. That's a perfect organization. The Global Healthcare Security Agenda is another effort that can provide information flow to dozens of countries around the world. So the all-of-the-above approach is necessary, and it has to require information flow.
Mr. Chairman, as you recall in one of my earlier answers, I talked about regional approaches. When we started the CTR program, it was mostly, nation-state specific, one program, one country. The regional approach allows for this kind of information sharing across regional boundaries, so it enhances the overall protection within regions as opposed to just looking at this solely by country. So it really does help in the broader understanding.
I think the chairman raises a very good point that we have a whole set of emerging tools that can greatly add to information sharing and biosurveillance. We've learned during the pandemic how to expand the tool set that we have to additional tools. For example, in Uganda and in Africa, there are a whole set of cell phone-based tools that we had not previously used to the degree we use now. And so we're trying to take advantage of the whole new tool set that is out there. And I think the global pandemic, I think the chairman noted that there's great infrastructure being built to deal with this pandemic. And there's new technologies that are being integrated into biosurveillance, and this is a good example of how we need to build out our capabilities and our data flows to capture all the information that's available.
Well, great. I certainly want to thank all four of our witnesses for their service to our country, and again, make sure everyone's safe, and we will get through this, but let's get through this in a more resilient way, in a stronger way, and in a way that we can protect against the next pandemic or future biothreats. I don't know if Chairman Langevin is still on, and if he wants to make any closing statements.
I am here, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your joint collaboration and putting this hearing together. I enjoyed working with you on this, and it certainly was an important hearing and very timely. Right now, I too want to thank our witnesses and obviously the work in your portfolios, whether it's countering weapons of mass destruction or the work at Btrp and our other witnesses in your portfolio. These are obviously essential capabilities that you bring to the table that are important to the nation and indeed the world. So we have continued work that we're going to continue to do together. We want to make sure that you're properly resourced and that we have the plans and the procedures in place to respond effectively. And we can rest assured there will be some future event that we are going to have to confront. And we want to make sure that we are as prepared as possible and can respond with the speed and agility that is necessary to save lives, keep people healthy, and protect the country. So with that, I deeply thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that members may have additional questions, and I ask that you would respond in writing expeditiously. With that, I have no further questions, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Langevin. And again, our thoughts and prayers are with everybody around the world who's impacted by COVID-19, and certainly with our President and First Lady and the First Family. And with that, again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here this morning, and the hearing is adjourned.